completely new user base. People like my mum and dad. And the only way you can get that software there is really for people to to really hit that mainstream is to get the software and devices. We make it very easy these days to install Ubuntu from Windows using Woobi. You can install it from a USB stick. You can try it out online. There's lots of ways in which you can try the software and evaluate it, and I think that's wonderful. But, changing operating systems is not something that most people do. And, because, it'd be like me changing the operating system on my cell phone. Like, I'm never gonna do that because it's scary. Because it's not something I'm familiar with,
Well, we've had this discussion on the show before, and I've said to Roy that certainly the people that I installed Linux for use their computers like a toaster. They couldn't care what.
Yeah, it's an appliance.
Yeah. But I mean, the one thing with Ubuntu, and it's certainly been well received. That's why I said before the show I'm a little bit biased in any questions I ask you, because I've deployed this quite a few times to new users. The actual system itself is great. Once it's up and running, it's there. It's out of the box. I hate using that term because everybody seems to use it, but it's out of the box. Yeah. The problem being is to get somebody to actually physically install it themselves is a scary part, and that's what holds back, I think, a lot of people from experiences in Ubuntu in particular when they would like to try it, because the initial install, from removing Windows or dual booting Windows, would put a lot of average users off. If there was a way that that could be circumvented, even via sort of browser ballots type thing that we've seen recently, which would be a great idea. I'm very excited by the new version of Ubuntu, and I think it's going to do great things. I think with the Android platform especially, it's shown that the mainstream big names aren't needed now to power the devices. I think Android's done a lot to show that to the masses as well, and that things like Ubuntu can really step up to the mark, if they're appealing to the new user and to the experience. I hate saying that Ubuntu is implying that Ubuntu is just for the new user, because I know plenty of Linux experts which use Ubuntu because it's out of the box. They've got other tasks to do and they just want things working. So I'm really excited by a new version, and I would hope by the next release it's any of the issues which the critics sort of focus on would be ironed out, and it's full steam ahead.
There is sorry, you go first.
Sorry, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, just going back to a point we kind of briefly covered earlier on as well, is that I can understand why there's been so much focus on Unity in the 11.04 release, because it is new. It's a big, exciting new visual thing. I think it's important as well that we don't forget that an operating system is a collection of pieces. It's a system, and it's a collection of cogs that work together to deliver a consistent experience. One thing that I think has been less spoken about in Ubuntu, and it's actually an area which I only really truly noticed actually about 3 months ago, is I've upgraded from release to release. As soon as we get to Alpha 1, I'm usually upgraded, and I'm running the development release, and I'm providing bug reports and testing out things as part of my work. But the problem with upgrading is that you often never see the experience from the perspective of someone who is installing it for the first time. So you don't see the installer as often. You don't see how Ubuntu One is set up and how your email is set up and your chat accounts and all the rest of it. But I decided a couple of months ago to reinstall Natty from scratch, to get rid of all the nonsense that I collected, all the cruft that I collected on my computer over the last 2 or 3 years. And the thing that really impressed me was the consistency of the experience, the visual, not only the visual look of the experience, but also how easy it was to get everything set up. Ubuntu's not the only distro that's making improvements in this area by far. Fedora and Debian and SUSE are doing wonderful work there. But I think it's important for us to not forget that Unity is, in my mind, 10% of it. It's just a means of starting apps and finding files. But the selection of the applications on the disk, the way in which you can back up content, the way in which you can sync your contacts, the way in which the machine operates, the visual look and feel, all of that is critically important in achieving that goal of bringing free software to everybody, which I think is the most important thing that we can do. Free software is I think of tremendous value to mankind and womankind, and I love the fact that people with a technical background enjoy it and use it, but just think what it's going to be like when the masses are going to be using it and the freedom that we're going to take to them. And it's that combined system I think is critically important for us to deliver. So I think it's important that we don't get too hung up in Unity. It's important to criticize and to critique where it's necessary.
Of criticism. I think I've been too kind of forthcoming and not be given hard questions about the Unity actually represents something that's been a source of resentment towards Canonical. Not anything new. It's been going on for years now. You mentioned you try to present Unity as a unification of interfaces, devices, and so on, and the possibility of trying to use one package to do everything. But that's within Canonical's realms, with copyrights owned by Canonical, which is another point of contention. But the main issue there is trying to portray Unity as a case of unity. It's a bit of a simplification because maybe it's Unity for Ubuntu, but from the point of view of other distributions, it actually separates them even more. And this is the sticking point for some people. Now, the question I would like to ask is, one thing, for example, I'll give an example, is I think Canonical hired a person who was one of the main developers, if not the main developer of Compass. And I suppose he mostly works on the Canonical side of things, trying to improve the experience from the Ubuntu point of view. And this might have some effect on people who don't use the same interface or the same type of desktop experience.
So I think there's 2 points there. One, in terms of Sam, who works in Compass, he works on Compass. Every improvement to Compass will benefit any client that's running on Compass. So, naturally, his focus is on making sure that Unity runs well on Compass, which is understandable because, that's his job. But all of his improvements to Compass actually benefit everything. In the same way that, when Bryce Harrington or Chris Hulse-Rogers work on X, the improvements and the bug fixes that they make to X will benefit the wider community. In terms of the point you made about whether Unity is whether it's just Unity for Ubuntu and whether it's Unity for distributions, I think you raise an interesting point, but I think it's also important to note that so 2 things. One is that the idea that all distributions can align on everything it's a misnomer, and we learned that years ago with Linux. There are certain things that distributions have a strong commonality with. All Linux distributions ship the Linux kernel. Pretty much all of them ship x.org. Pretty much all of them ship GCC. There are some common foundational components. Where the distros tend to diverge is where desktop distributions diverge are really in terms of the desktop user interface. Some ship KD, some ship GNOME, some are shipping GNOME Shell now, some are shipping Unity.
I'd say some, it's just one of them. No, I'm thinking that it's mostly KD and GNOME. I'm thinking about the vanilla distribution or the vanilla form of these KD desktop and GNOME desktop. I cannot think of any company any distribution or company which makes significant modifications to the default package to change wallpapers. Okay.
Well,
but things of the experience, it might have a control panel that's different, but the experience is unified in the sense that you could move from a Mandriva, let's say the GNOME side to a
you could. You could, but that is very much the traditional definition of a distribution is that you take upstream software and you ship it, and that's what we're doing in Ubuntu is no different. We're taking software that is developed, free software that is developed, and we're shipping it inside Ubuntu. We've changed the default user interface, admittedly, and that will make it more difficult for people to move in between distributions. But to be honest with you,
even the .dot file, things like that,
but most of the default configuration in terms of Ubuntu is pretty standard. Unity's a bit different, but if you install, you can load the classic desktop or you can install KD on it, and everything will function pretty decently. But also, one of the reasons why I'm happy with the focus that we're taking is that I think it's time that we start shaking things up a little bit in terms of how we make Linux distributions. We've been taking the same approach to just shipping upstream software for years, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the reason why part of the reason why I'm excited about Ayatana is the fact that I believe that there is the combined input from distribution makers and upstream software developers in terms of UI is exciting for solving real world problems. If we're going to get Linux to the masses, I think what we need to do is we need to understand what the masses need. And that's where we're seeing